watching The Source on CNN Philippines. We are counting down to our very own vice presidential and presidential debates. 7 vice presidential candidates will stand side by side to answer the hard questions on Saturday, February 26 at 5 p.m. at the University of Santo Tomas in Manila. 9 presidential bets will also take the debate stage on Sunday, February 27 at 5 p.m., also at UST. Similar to more developed countries, televised debates now play a key role in our nation's election cycles. But why are these political showdowns important for both candidates and voters? Our senior correspondent David Santos reports.
When Rodrigo Duterte and Leni Robredo were elected in 2016, their performances during televised debates were widely viewed as having played a crucial role in their victories.
I think debates are important because they allow voters to access candidates' platforms in a comparative way.
London-based Filipino debate expert and rights advocate Sharmila Parmanan explains why live candidate face-offs have become an election staple just like in other countries.
But second, it also creates a more accountable public culture and political culture, because the signal it gives to political candidates is you need to explain yourself. You need to justify yourself. And we create a culture where people are willing to ask questions and willing to challenge policies.
More than just presenting their platforms in equal opportunity, political debates primarily help voters make informed choices.
Kasi gusto nating ma-empower yung voters eh. So para pagdating ng election day, sigurado sila na matalino yung magiging desisyon nila, na pinag-isipan nila yung magiging desisyon nila.
Parmanan says voters should watch out for motherhood statements and empty promises.
So don't look for candidates that promise the moon and the stars.
Fact-check their claims and keep an eye on their demeanor.
Look at their unscripted answers as well, which can indicate some things about their temperament. How do they characterize their opponents? Are they able to accept criticism?
A live audience can make a spectacle out of a political showdown, but since we're still in a pandemic, tech giant Microsoft, through its Microsoft Teams technology, will set up a virtual audience that will take part in the 2-day CNN Philippines debates.
It will enable a more human feel to it, bringing the energy of a virtual audience into the mix and allowing for a more personal interaction between the candidates and our audience. Microsoft really feels a strong responsibility to ensure that the democratic process is upheld for every Filipino.
CNN-PH and Microsoft have been working for months on this project, hoping to bridge the voters and the candidates in this historic election. David Santos, CNN Philippines.
Let's go straight to the sources of the story. Political science professor Aries Arugay and Kontra Daya convenor Danilo Arao are joining us now live. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being here. And as you know, CNN Philippines will host the vice presidential and presidential debates this weekend. Can you talk to us about how important these debates are for, firstly, the electorate, and secondly, for the candidates? Professor Arao, let's start with you.
Of course, for the electorate, it's necessary in the shaping of public opinion because if you want to make informed decisions, it should be based on platforms. And the debates can be good opportunities for articulation of stands on specific issues, as well as what they plan to do if they win the presidency or the vice presidency. Of course, for the candidates, it's a good measure to size up the opponent. That's one practical advantage. And you can more or less challenge certain claims by your opponents with regard to the burning issues of the day. And if I'm not sure of the format of CNN Philippines debates, but I hope it will be unlike the other presidential debates where there's not much interaction or interrogation among candidates. The spotlight should be on the candidates, not on the moderators or the panelists. So there should be some interaction, there should be some conversation going on to be effectively moderated by whoever's assigned to manage the debates.
All right, thank you for that, sir. Of course, joining us as well is Danilo Arao. How important are these debates for voters and candidates alike? All right. Yes, sorry, Aries, go ahead.
Right. we don't have a rigorous political science study on actually the effect of a debate in voter preferences. But if we draw on comparative studies from other countries, there are limited effects on the abilities of debates to voter persuasion, because debates can increase knowledge, but there are two caveats here. First, those who tune in to debates are normally those that are already politically engaged, meaning a lot of them are already partisans. They've already made their decisions. And if you would look at the polls right now, there's only around 5 or 6% who are undecided. So I would caution the weighing heavily on the impact of debate. If anything, it rallies the base. So it's still important that candidates show up, because it somehow gives partisan supporters more ammunition, more persuasive material for them to be able not only to vote for the candidate, but to even campaign for the candidate. And lastly, we know that the spectacle of debates always emphasizes whether some candidate did better than others. But at the end, poor performance, could this actually change minds of voters? The political science research so far has been inconclusive on this. At the end, debates increase knowledge. Whether that will persuade people to vote or to change their minds, the jury is still out.
All right. So, I mean, that really doesn't sound like a lot, just 5 to 6% who are undecided, right? So, we have candidates who are not attending. What do you think this non-attendance implies on the parts of the candidates? And what does this do to the opinion that voters have of them?
Can I start?
Yes, please.
Okay. Well, through the years, usually sometimes the survey leaders would tend to be absent in some, but not all, presidential debates for the simple reason that there could be a clear conflict of schedule, or sometimes the dirty little secret is that they want to make less mistakes so that they can somehow maintain their lead. However, having said that, it's still necessary for them to show up for the reasons that Dr. Arugay said. We need to make sure that they are able to articulate on the burning issues of the day, and they are able to compete their thoughts with their opponent. They're able to compete effectively with regard to their level of articulation. Because if you're the president or the vice president, you will almost always be on the public spotlight, practically during the waking hours of the day. So you need to prove that you're there for the long haul insofar as the presidency or the vice presidency would be concerned. So showing up would still be important, in my opinion. Thank you.
All right. And for you, Professor, what's your take on that?
I agree with Professor Arao. I think the optics of absence really communicates not only that the candidate does not think that debates matter, but thinks that that this is a part of a larger strategy, which I think robs voters of the total picture of the candidacy or the presidential bid of a candidate. So while we know that debates might not impact voter persuasion on the basis of performance, absence, I think, somehow communicates that, one, the candidate does not take debates seriously, doesn't really have perhaps what it takes to face off with possible candidates. And we know that debates will be important in policy making. When these candidates, one of them becomes president, they will engage in a lot of debates. We're not electing a king. We're electing a president who will have to compromise, who will have to negotiate. And seeing their persuasive skills is, I think, important for voters to make that informed choice.
Do you think if a voter were supporting a particular candidate and that candidate does not show up at the debates, could this change their mind about the candidates that don't show up?
think it will, in the sense that there's still a possibility that voters would change their minds. I mean, let's remember what happened in 1992. We were expecting Ramon Mitra to win the presidency, but because of a controversial issue that happened on the eve of the elections, suddenly Fidel Ramos became the president by virtue of a plurality vote. So in the context of debates, there's always that possibility. Although, as Dr. Arugay correctly mentioned, there's not much causality in terms of empirical data to prove that it would be substantial enough to turn the tide in favor of a particular candidate. So we go back to the fundamental issue of showing up. It's important for the candidate to take seriously these debates for the simple reason that they have to prove their mettle as president or vice president, because it's inherent in transactional politics that they will be engaging in debates and other forms of communication through the media or through other means. So they should be able to prove it as early as now, and the debate is an excellent opportunity. So again, we repeat the need to put the spotlight on the candidates. It's very important that they interact and they debate among themselves despite the existence of certain Comelec guidelines stating that they should not be allowed, or they are being discouraged to interact with one another, and that debate should just be question and answer portions. I think the Comelec is dead wrong on that, because it defeats the purpose of what a debate should be.
Right, there is that necessity for that back and forth, right? Now, of course, in a debate, the time is limited, right? So much more limited compared to a one-on-one interview. How does this work for or against the candidates? Maybe Professor Arugay, you can start with this one.
Right. As I've said earlier, debates are only one communication data point across many other types of campaigning and communication. And this is why for candidates, they need to make sure that the debates form part of their larger communication strategy. If there's anything proven in political science research around the world, is that the effects of debates is often intermediated by how the debates will be carried out in post-campaign activities. So therefore, candidates could use, they might have little time to say in the debate, but they could use that as platforms, as springboards, to further communicate what they want to convey to the voters in the campaign trail, in their ads, in others. So I think we should not expect that there will be a lot of substance given the format, given the time limitation. But I think candidates have to be strategic in what do they really want to convey, and use their debate performance in their further campaign activities. Because how they frame their performance in the debate, how they frame their answers, and unfortunately with social media, a lot of this can be done without the candidate's approval or consent. So a lot is happening at the present landscape that makes debates important tools for campaigning.
Right, and we did have that debate expert earlier say that, you know, you're not just going to be listening to the words they're saying, but you're going to look at a lot of the non-verbal things that happen on stage. Now, you know, we started talking about it a little earlier. Comelec is going to have its own set of debates, and they've already set out the initial rules. I'd like to get your reaction on some of these. The first one there being the debate will have a single moderator who will field the questions, and there's no advance copy of the questions that will be given to candidates. So maybe Professor Arao, you can start us off about what you think of those two.
Well, those two guidelines, I think they make sense because we should not be giving time for candidates to prepare for whatever advanced questions will be given to him or her. Why do we discourage the giving of advanced copies? Because we try to avoid parenthood statements and well-scripted answers. What we need is spontaneity. What is the thing that comes to mind when that question is asked? Of course, the caveat here is that topics should be given For example, topics like foreign policy, gender issues, children's rights. If these are part of the topics of the debates, then the candidate should be given time to prepare for such topics. But there's a difference between giving advanced questions. Now, with regard to the questions to be raised by the moderator, of course, it makes sense for a moderator to ask questions. But what we're looking for is the opportunity for candidates to make rebuttals, to challenge the views of their opponents. I think I'm optimistic that the candidates will be able to comport themselves in a manner that would be acceptable on national television. And I really don't understand the Comelec for trying to discourage it in their own debate format. So in a situation where the Comelec is unwilling to do so, I think the basic challenge for the privately owned media is to veer away from such Comelec guidelines and allow the spotlight to be really put on the candidates by rebuttals, cross-arguments, cross-examination, and other forms of banter. Thank you.
That's right. So, you're talking about that rule being considered by Comelec to not allow candidates to ask each other questions. And as you said, that's rather strange for a debate, right? Can we get your thoughts on that, Professor Aries?
Yes, I find it weird because a debate is supposed to be a dynamic interaction between the interlocutors, the speakers, and the moderator, quote unquote moderator, actually moderates or somehow just makes sure sure that the rules are followed. I do want to emphasize that the debate is about the candidates. It's not about the moderator. It's not about panelists. We've seen that in other instances, it seems that the spotlight was taken away from candidates. This is not a show except for it is for the voters to be able to make informed choices on the basis of what candidates say and how do they interact with one another. I think that might be because we don't like confrontation. I don't know if it's still part of our culture, but this is an election with contesting visions of different candidates. If you're not allowing them to clash or to contend with one another, then what's the point?
Right. Okay. So I'd like to get a preview of the VP and presidential debates. Right. What are you expecting based on those among them who have so far expressed clear plans when elected? What are your general thoughts on them so far? And you see the VP candidates here on the screen. Maybe we can start with you, Professor Arao.
Okay. Of course, I expect them to have interactions with each other. Again, I'm not familiar with the debate format to be implemented by CNN Philippines. But again, I hope and I beg of you to provide the spotlight mainly on the candidates themselves because it's important for the people to know where they stand on issues. And if they challenge each other, well and good. I mean, we're not after sound bites. We're not after fire and brimstone. What we're after is how they comport themselves under pressure. Some candidates would tend to argue that they prefer not to attend debates because of the time limit. Actually, that's wrong. The main challenge for the candidates would be to articulate themselves in the shortest time possible. If Miss Universe beauty pageant contestants can do that in 30 seconds, why can't they articulate their stand in 3 minutes or maybe provide rebuttals in under 1 minute? I mean, they can do that. If we have such high standards for, our beauty contestants, beauty pageant contestants, why can't we have a higher standard or maybe just the same standards for our presidential and our vice presidential candidates? So that's one point. Mm-hmm. Now, the other point that we need to emphasize as well quite quickly is the fact that, again, the candidates should be able to come prepared even if the questions are not given to them in advance. Right. So if they don't have that skill, then they don't belong in the presidential or vice presidential race.
All right, I've only got a few minutes left, but your thoughts on this as well, please, Professor Aries. What can we expect this weekend?
Right. Well, I expect them to be a bit more substantive because there's been a lot of other opportunities for them to lay out some of the basics of their policy position. So I would expect them to double down, to be more particular, to avoid motherhood statements despite the time limit, and to tell us something new, something fresh, so that voters can be engaged and voters won't say that, oh, I already heard this, I'm just gonna turn the channel. And finally, I think what I expect, and this might be ideal, is that candidates won't patronize voters and they won't patronize one another.
Right. Well said. Thank you so much for being here with us. That was, of course, Professor Aries Arugay and Professor Danilo Arao. Thank you for your time. We will be taking a short break. This is The Source on CNN Philippines. Please stay tuned.